Already hospital facilities have begun to crack under the strain.
Major cities in all parts of the country, New York, Los Angeles, report plague victims falling dead in the streets, in their homes, at their work.
Conrad Channel, this is a Class 1 emergency. All civilian traffic is barred from streets and highways. Stay in your homes. Stay in your homes. Those found without specific military orders are subject to summary execution. Stay in your homes. Repeat, Conrad Channel, this is a Class 1 emergency. All civilian traffic is barred from streets and highways.
Hi, this is John Seven. Welcome to How I Spent My Pandemic. When I talk to people about how the pandemic affected their lives, it usually is about change. But today's guest, while it is about change for her, it's also about baggage she brought into the pandemic, and dealing with that sort of brought about the change, or at least helped bring about the change. My guest is Emily McMehen. Emily lives in Toronto, Canada. Traditionally, she would shuttle between Toronto and London and elsewhere, like Finland and Mongolia and Haiti. Emily is a filmmaker, and she directed a wonderful short film about Haiti, about voodoo practice in Haiti, called Ashante. That was in 2011. And she's also a talented artist and photographer and writer. And she's currently going for her PhD. Well, she was. That got delayed a little bit. Went on hold before the pandemic, and it carried on into the pandemic. See, Emily had a brain injury, and she's not sure what happened. She thought maybe she was hit by a car while she was on her bicycle, but maybe she wasn't. The police didn't seem to think she was, but her last memory was locking up her bike. So Emily doesn't know what happened. It may have been an assault. She's not sure, and she may never know, and she's okay with that. But she has to deal with the alterations to her brain, and that's been a journey for her. And then the pandemic hit. But for Emily, this story doesn't start with the pandemic like it does with so many people I talk to. It starts a bit before that. Emily had to go back through her brain injury first, because unless you know what kind of world she was inhabiting inside her head, you can't really understand how she reacted to the things that were happening outside her apartment.
If we go back a few months before the pandemic started, I was recovering from a traumatic brain injury. So there was a very strange kind of surreal phase where I was kind of trying to get back on my feet in that respect already. And then coming into the pandemic, I was just about to start going back to filmmaking. And my filmmaking involves travel. And so my trip to Mongolia, where I've been visiting for 15 years or so, 16 years, I guess, this year, it was scheduled to start in March. I think it was March 4th. I was supposed to go to Mongolia for about 6 weeks or something like that. And we were right on the cusp then. So I thought, I'm going to wait and see what happens, because there was a good chance I'd have to pass through China or Russia to get there, or both.
Right.
And I thought, okay, you know what? My friends there are really remote. So what I definitely don't want to do is be a vector. I don't want to bring anything through, Beijing or Moscow or anything like that into a really remote community, because they don't necessarily have the resources to protect themselves from it. So I was thinking it was just going to be, a few weeks or something, that everything was kind of on pause. Luckily, my friends in Mongolia managed it superbly. They closed down borders with China very early. And so they've been very solid there. I think they've had a couple of cases this year, but I think they've actually had more cases of the bubonic plague this year than they have of COVID.
That's right.
Which is very few, like single digits for both. And so on the one hand, I'm really glad that I didn't go, because everything did get so much more severe around the edges, and I could have been a vector, but I also feel like I could have spent the last sort of 7 months in Mongolia, which would not have been the end of the world.
Have you been filming there all these 15 years, or just visiting? And
in stops and starts, yeah. I mean, the project started in 2004.
okay.
It's taken sort of a number of variations and twists and turns, but I've got footage from this whole time that I've been going, and it's just a question of assembling it now into something that my friends there are kind of trying to help me shake some sense into. There's no rush to finish it necessarily. This was just the trip this year was going to be kind of a big deal because it was my first production trip post injury. So I had been kind of training over the winter, over December and January, refamiliarizing myself with my equipment, just kind of getting back into what I understood to be my kind of my rhythm when it comes to creative stuff. And that all kind of got suspended, which, I mean, I had still, for the first few weeks, I was still kind of drilling on it. Like I still had all my, was still doing all my kind of equipment checks and all of this sort of stuff, because I was thinking that the trip was just going to be postponed by a few weeks so I could just use the time to kind of really steep myself back in the knowledge of the stuff that I was going to be using. And because I'm kind of a one-woman show and I go on these trips, it's a lot. It's a lot to take on. Like, so, yeah, I was thinking I'd get to be kind of over-prepared. And then a whole bunch of stuff changed really quickly. My partner of 10 years left, also in March. Just kind of bolted across the country with the intention that I think we were going to reconnect there, but that sort of didn't happen, and he left quite suddenly, very shortly after that. And so I found myself suddenly here in Toronto, isolated completely. I don't live with anyone other than my dog. And kind of going through this heartbreak and having all of these kind of tenuous things, because I was suspicious of my own abilities when it comes to my professional stuff because of the brain injury. And that was complicated by another further health problem. So it was just this like massive collision of factors that all happened in kind of March and April. And so the first month or so was really just this very surreal kind of like, I was just trying to rush through the days. Like I would open my eyes and it would be like, oh God, here we are again. And just trying to make the days as short as possible, just trying to get through them. And a lot of that was doing nothing because I was just sort of in shock or something. I'm not really sure. The first month or two were really very, all sort of blurry and very sedentary.
Yeah.
And then I started thinking, okay, I've got to do something. Like this is just, it's ridiculous. There's all this time and it's stretching out all around me, and that's wonderful. And I'm not doing anything with it, but I was resistant for lots of reasons. So I started just setting a timer for myself, a 15-minute timer, where I was like, okay, you can sleep the rest of the day away if you want, but for 15 minutes, you have to do something, anything. Right. You can clean the house, you can, you can take a bath, you can walk the dog, you can just spend the next 15 minutes doing something, anything. And it started off with doing 15 minutes of reading, 15 minutes of organizing, 15 minutes of, something that would be enjoyable, drawing, writing, something like that. Mixed with and it started multiplying. So these little 15-minute intervals, they would happen several times a day. And I was like, actually, there's really something to this. So I started kind of expanding them depending on the different medium. So it was like, okay, well, since reading was one of the cognitive things with my injury, it's like, start reading 60 pages a day on any subject, It could be children's lit, it could be poetry, it could be your motorcycle manual, just 60 pages every day. And that was great. It was very difficult in the beginning, and I would be really fidgety and 10 pages in, be like, oh, I really don't want to do this. But just kind of shouldering through that like fidgety bit at the beginning, all of a sudden I found that I was really, really enjoying it. Some things were much easier. Some days I would go way over the limit. If I was reading something really fun or really light, some days if I was reading something more difficult, like my motorcycle manual, it would be a lot shorter. Or a lot more difficult. But yeah, so using that kind of framework, I set up these templates. So it became 60 pages a day of reading, 1,000 words or 90 minutes a day of writing, whichever felt more natural on the day. 2 hours a day, and that was very minimum. Almost never was it only 2 hours of creative stuff. So drawing, writing, sewing, or not writing, drawing, sewing, sculpture a little bit, working on my video edit, like the Mongolia project. And then I found myself really kind of champing at the bit for more tasks to fill these gaps in between all of these other things that I was doing, which was wonderful. But it meant that, I have an old motorcycle that has been kind of sadly neglected in my backyard for the last couple of years. And so I learned at least the basics of how to fix my motorcycle engine. I got recertified in PADI and scuba certification.
Wow.
Yeah, it was really this one like little kind of commitment to a 15-minute timer really was a kind of game changer.
Yeah.
Relatively early in the lockdown.
So creating this structure for you, are you typically like that, or is that something that grew out of the work you had to do after your brain injury?
Yeah, I'm not typically like that at all. If anything, my whole life, my reaction to any kind of structure has either been to like kick at it or burn it down. It's never been it's never been my thriving environment. But yeah, since the injury, I've noticed that I've had to take everything a lot more slowly, which at the beginning was very frustrating. I'd get really irritated with myself for not being able to do things as spontaneously or as quickly as I did before. And that could be in its way it had its own kind of defeating language built into that, I'm not accustomed to this kind of structure. I never really did well in it. And now I have to submit to it. And that had its own sort of difficult edge to it. Before the pandemic, I was still kind of very much in denial that I was dealing with that stuff at all. Like I wasn't really attempting to add a kind of structural level to my recovery in any sort of guided way or anything like that. So
What specifically was your brain struggling with in regard to just getting things done? Because you're talking about taking more time, and I just wondered, was it a processing thing that happened, or was it more complicated?
yeah, I mean, they're really strange, human brains. They're really, really complicated. I had a cognitive function issue. So I had particularly issues with my language centers. So after my injury, I was aphasic for I think 10 days, or aphasic for a period of 10 days where I was just speaking kind of in gibberish. It made sense to me. I knew what I was talking about, and I thought I was using all the right words. But when I read some of the stuff that I was writing then, it's like, wow, that's those are English words, but not in any kind of configuration that makes sense at all. So I was really defensive about that. I was really shy about it. So I kind of was relentlessly practicing just saying the right words and writing the right words so I could at least like speak and email with people in a somewhat like some semblance of normal language. Other languages, I could speak 3 languages before the injury, French, Creole, and English. and other two languages were completely out the window. I wasn't. My friend in Haiti said it was like I was talking in my sleep. So it was, yeah, bumpy. And then reading was very, very difficult, very, very, very slow. And very difficult to remember things. Like I'd read 10 pages, and just to be able to put the words in a row, to be able to read 10 pages could take hours. And then storing that information was almost impossible. If I wrote notes, which I did occasionally at the beginning, I couldn't remember who wrote them, basically. I would look at them and they would be unfamiliar. So reintroducing myself to language also kind of came with this weird accompaniment of headaches. So I would start reading and then I'd get a headache, and then you get that kind of like aversion therapy, like the sort of electrified cupcake, like definitely don't pick up that book, you're going to get a headache. So getting around that took some kind of some cagey breaking down of things. I think actually that 15-minute timer was a really big breakthrough for me for that, because just to sit with a book for 15 minutes and be able to close it, and even if I had to, like, even if I didn't remember anything in it, even if I didn't take any notes, if I didn't store the information, I didn't feel like I had to, I could read the same 10 pages tomorrow. I think that was a really good kind of icebreaker in terms of getting comfortable again with processing language.
Did all that affect your response to I guess just figuring out what you're supposed to do in face of, say, the pandemic, and then your breakup, and then your other medical problems? There are all these things where you actually have to organize a response, and including an emotional response. And did your brain injury challenges affect that as well?
Well, something that I think was actually really beneficial from this kind of like, where I said that at the beginning, I would wake up and it was like, oh my God, it's the beginning of another day. Like, I wish I would just, like, I wish I could be at the end of it already. It was something about just kind of deciding to spend this time with myself that it meant there was an inbuilt kind of structure. It was me and my dog. So there were certain kind of prerequisites. There had to be a certain amount of dog walk time every day, no matter what. There had to be dog food time, human food time. But this kind of every single day, even if I ended up picking up the same book and reading it again from the beginning, from the exact same place the next day as I had the previous day, it didn't, where it maybe felt like Groundhog Day for the first little bit at the beginning. I actually really embraced that sense of like, okay, well, like I can make minor adjustments today and tomorrow I can revisit them or not, and that's fine. And there was something about, because for me, after the injury and before the pandemic, I had already been kind of in a state of suspended animation as far as my work goes, because I was trying to, frame my recovery in such a way that it would sort of funnel me right back into the place that I was before. And the pandemic really gave me the opportunity to not do that. And instead of immediately trying to get back into a place that would have very unlikely been a good fit for the moment, it really gave me this expansive space to work out a different way of solving those problems.
So have you had the time to, when that opportunity returns, have you had the time to really come up with I don't know if it would be as tight as an actual game plan for what you're going to do, but at least a concept of once you get back there, how you're going to approach it?
Yeah, and actually, I feel like because I've been so much more productive with my time in a lot of ways, and I've been so much more inventive with like approaches to curiosity, I guess. I really do think that going back to work in creative stuff, like film in particular, is going to be really fun. I mean, it's going to be really fun just to be around people again when the opportunity presents itself. But I think it's also given me a kind of a much more diverse toolbox in terms of problem solving and in terms of how to approach creative questions, and how to take creative questions to other people. Like
Hmm.
where I've been kind of locked in this little room for this whole time, being able to spend time with people that I know fairly well in Mongolia and be like, great, I'm so excited to hear what you have to say about this. And kind of use that as a jumping off point into something I think maybe richer than would have materialized had we started when we planned to.
Yeah. Have you had any, I mean, I'm sure you've had contact with humans, but have you had any face-to-face in a while, or how has that gone?
Here and there, I mean, in Toronto, we've done things pretty. I mean, I'd like to say we've done things pretty well. We're having a bit of a severe uptick at the moment, so we're revisiting those things. But, having, I call them like porch beers, having friends over for a beer on my porch, going and sitting in my parents' backyard. They've got a big backyard, so we could sit far enough away from each other that we didn't cross paths. We've Yeah, there's been face-to-face time. It's been very minimal. I'd say like once or twice a week at most, I would see somebody else face-to-face. Um, and I think because we're all a little bit gun shy, they wouldn't be really particularly long hangouts.
Right.
We have had I've had a weekly pub quiz night that we do by Zoom, which has been really fun.
Okay.
And yeah, sort of creative reading and writing group that we also do by Zoom, which has been really fun. And actually scuba diving, that was great. That was it was nicely timed because it was in the middle of the really hot weather, and it's like naturally social distanced because you're
Yeah,
wearing
yeah,
all
I
this
guess.
protective gear and underwater and everything. It was really, really nice.
Where do you go to do that?
Well, there are three places in Ontario. One was this like really, really, really mucky little tiny lake just outside of Hamilton, Ontario, called Trout
Okay.
Lake. And I say mucky, like the visibility, if you could see your hand in front of your face, it was like you could be surprised by these little fish when they were right basically against your nose, but the visibility was just awful. Still fun, but like sci-fi in a sort of primordial goo sort of way. And then Tobermory, which is beautiful, excellent visibility, but my God, it's so cold. Um, and yeah, Tobermory is on. So I guess the other two places are both in Tobermory, and that's sort of on Lake Superior.
Okay.
Yeah, very deep, very cold, but very beautiful.
So you did get out. You got away and out, basically.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, as much as I could, yeah. And a few times actually, and one of the ways that I got into the scuba diving actually was because I would take my dog and just go hike, like find a place, drive for 2 hours and just find a place and go hiking. And for a while, I didn't see anybody. And then I did occasionally start to see people, and that was actually where I saw a bunch of people getting ready to do a scuba trip, and I thought, oh, that's something that I
Hmm.
could work into the schedule.
So I forget, had you done that before, or this was your first
Scuba
time
diving?
ever? Yeah.
Well, I did it a long time I was
Okay.
in my 20s, I did it a bit. I got certified the first time in Hawaii when I was in my 20s, and then I did it for about 2 or 3 years, and it sort of fell off. And then after the injury, I was worried that I don't know why this was one of the things that stuck in my mind, but they say after you've had a traumatic brain injury that scuba diving is maybe off the table for you forever.
Yeah.
Even though I hadn't done it in years, for some reason this really stung. I was like, oh no, what if I can't ever scuba dive again? And I thought, like, well, if I'm gonna try it, like doing it in a swimming pool or this really shallow lake or whatever, just to see if it's safe and I can survive it if I try it again, this is maybe the best sort of way to bracket that experiment.
Yeah.
And I did, and it turned out to be fine. Like, I don't have any difficulty. The concern would be either your cognitive abilities affecting your response time underwater, and that my cognitive issues are not that kind of problem, um, or your sinuses being unable to equalize, so you can't adjust internally
Hmm.
to the pressure of the water. And it took a little bit of getting used to. I have to use a slightly different method than I did before, but I can still do that. So that was like a little like burst of sunshine that this is something I get to pick up again.
Have you found anything that you can't do that is just, maybe through your efforts you just haven't, um, I don't know, been able to achieve that you used to do?
Well, it's tricky that. I mean, there are a lot of things I can't do the way that I did them before.
Hmm.
I don't necessarily know that that's a bad thing. Uh, the way that I was doing things before, especially when it comes to reading and writing, was a lot of this sort of fly by the seat of my pants type stuff, which was fun, but it meant that I did a lot of stuff at the 11th hour. I would procrastinate about deadlines. Um, I don't have the luxury of that sort of approach anymore. So I have to take a bit more time for everything, and I have to be um, more strategic in how I approach projects or how I approach even objectives in terms of reading and writing. So it's not that I can't do it. It's just that I have to do it in a very different way than the way that I did it all my life before. And again, I mean, I don't think, I think if anything, it might be an improvement in a big picture sort of way, even though it doesn't always
Yeah.
feel like that in the moment.
Yeah.
But I don't think that I've come across anything. I don't think I've come across anything that I've really thought like, oh, that's a shame. I'll never be able to do X again. I'm pretty sure there is a workaround for just about everything.
Did you? When you were telling me about the speaking and writing, and I was thinking, and I was going to ask you at that point, did you ever get recordings of yourself speaking when you weren't speaking properly?
No, it's funny that you asked
Uh,
that because I wondered that too. And I think even somebody else suggested that early in the process, but I was so shy about it at the time. I think I didn't want anybody to know. I wish that I had because uh, I remember it all from inside my own head, right? So I remember
mhm.
it all as being, I was normal the whole time. I don't remember there being any period of adjustment there. But like I say, when I read the emails and stuff, right, the day after the injury, I remember, because I was in the middle of a PhD, or I was at the very end of a PhD, which obviously had to be suspended as well. Um, I remember sending a message to my supervisors where I was like, oh, I'm just going to send off a quick email so that they know that I'll be a couple of days late with my whatever. And I reread that months later and was thinking like, oh my God. They must have thought that there was, you know, that I was on drugs or something. It was ridiculous. Um, and yeah, so there was an overconfidence, and I can see that in my writing sometimes. Like when I revisit stuff, like just little notes and stuff that I was writing to people at that point. But yeah, there's no recording of me speaking.
That's a shame.
Yeah,
I'd be
yeah,
fascinated to hear that.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, it probably would have freaked me out pretty bad for a few months afterwards,
Yeah.
but to hear it now would actually be really interesting.
So at this point, I mean, you've coped fairly well, and you've even, um, I guess, expanded. Um, Maybe not from the point you were, say, 2 years ago, but expanded from the point that you were brought to from your injury, and you seem to be pretty successful at kind of regaining ground and maybe like restructuring ground in a way that you didn't expect. But is there still stuff ahead for you that you feel like you need to uh well, just cover for yourself to get yourself to a place where you're confident?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I've been thinking about that a lot from a slightly different viewpoint in the last couple of months. Um, so I really want to finish my PhD, for example, and it was very close to the end. But like I say, the nature of of the cognitive difficulty I had means that when I reread parts of the thesis that I wrote, I'm like, wow, this is great. I wonder who wrote this. And there are other bits where I've taken notes, and it's like, I have no idea who wrote that stuff. I have no idea what the thought process, what thought processes went into the ideas that are expressed there. So there's going to, it's a bit like whatever form it takes is going to have a bit of a split personality, which ultimately, if it's fine with my supervision, it's fine with me. But one of the things, just to make sure I'm at a level where I can accommodate that I've decided to do is I'm doing some online courses at U of T this semester in creative writing. And they're just like continuing education classes, but they're great because it's a group of other people who are all also kind of trying to figure out how to tinker with language in a new way. It's pretty low stakes in the sense that if I really am not up to the task, it's not a great loss if I don't finish these courses, or if I don't finish them to the level that I'd like to. But it's a good sort of bellwether, I think, for whether or not I'm ready to go back in at the doctoral level. I realized taking the classes that I've started just in the last couple of weeks, I realize I'm glad that I had hoped that I would go back to do the PhD this fall, and now I'm really glad that I didn't try to set myself up for that, because it would have been more than I was ready for in the moment.
So you said this a few times, like not come out and said it, but sort of said it. That not completely, but like in little ways, little parts, aspects, you do feel like a different person than the person you were, like in some places, in some parts of you.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that's true. Because first of all, I've picked up so many weird skills over the last season. I've been joking with some friends of mine that I'm basically like a Swiss Army knife now. All these sort of back pocket skills are going to come in handy at some point. But through that process, I do feel quite changed. And I think, time will tell to what extent that is an improvement over whatever was there before. But I feel like the changes overall have been pretty constructive. They haven't always been pleasant, and there's been a lot of stuff that's changed that, was out of my control, and I would have maybe wished to have done it differently had I been given the option. But I think ultimately what's come out of it is still taking shape, but I think it's at least got tremendous potential to be something positive.
Yeah, and that must help in some ways, because everyone, in looking forward, it's kind of hard to see the forward part. You don't know what you're looking at, and I mean everybody's kind of in that position. So it just seems like having that to look back at, in a way, might make the uncertainty of what's ahead a little easier, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's because I was the work that I do sort of to pay the bills, and the work that I was doing both before and since the injury has all been freelance, and it means wearing a lot of hats, and there wasn't really, really solid kind of infrastructure in my life before the pandemic. It was very busy compared to what it's been during or since. And it involved a lot more movement. But I also feel that was a good kind of preparation for whatever follows, that I'm not coming out of any of this like grasping for a solid foundation. I feel pretty confident sort of swimming in deep water, I suppose. So whatever is coming after this, I just feel like the better I'm kind of the better I am at building the skills I'm working on now, and the better I am at, keeping my own company, for lack of a better expression, will help me figure out whatever the next step is going to be. I don't mind taking, like a big step into the dark. Basically, I don't find that something that worries me at all. But mostly at the moment, I'm kind of focused on. I'm not focused on much past the end of my nose, to be totally honest.
A big thanks to Emily McMehen for sharing this episode and telling us all the stuff she's been going through. If you ever see Emily, you should talk to her. She's a good conversation. Meanwhile, before you do that, you can go to destroythemightyatom.bandcamp.com and pick up some Mighty Atom music. They do all the music here. And I'm at john7.me. That's a good place to start finding out who I am and why I'm doing this. And it's also a good place to get some info about my Patreon, where you can help sustain this podcast and keep it alive long past the pandemic.